and we sailed the ocean again. The Nazis attacked a convoy of Allied ships. The convoy scattered over the sea. Gremyshny and Grozny scoured the ocean for several days, going far to the north, up to the edge of the polar ice. The commander gathered us together and told us the whole truth. Hitler's squadron, headed by the line ship Tirpitz, entered this area. At any moment there may be a meeting with her. And then we will be forced to engage in battle, said Gurin. The forces, of course, are unequal. Is everyone ready for this? We knew what awaited us. 2 of our ships will engage in battle with a whole fascist squadron. It's unlikely we'll get out of the fight alive, but we must. If we take the fire, we'll save the convoy, save the transports and hundreds of men. That's the law of maritime brotherhood. It was a warm, beautiful day. The sea played in the rays of the sun with golden highlights. We were 20 or a little more, and we all wanted to live. But the commander's question was followed by a friendly answer. Ready. Ready. ... With the Nazi squadron we did not meet. Tirpitz was torpedoed by the heroic crew of a Soviet submarine under the command of Lunin. The Nazi ships, having surrounded the damaged cruiser with a ring, hurried to take it to the base. The weather turned bad. A cold headwind was blowing, and we were very sorry that by the will of the intendant we had given our coats to the shore warehouse. In our coats the cold penetrated to the very bones, and we had to pull on the whole clothing certificate, up to the second calfskin. I was now on watch on the left automatic anti-aircraft gun. The thing is that at the last parking lot we were supplied with 2 new anti-aircraft guns, but the staff for them have not yet provided. We had to mobilize internal reserves. Grigory Babich and Alexander Domrian, yesterday's gunners, were appointed commanders of the machine guns, and the calculations were made up of people of various specialties. On the left machine gun, under the command of Domrian, were gunner me and artilleryman Nikolai Tarilov, the adjuster of corrections Kok Boris Kornilov, loader boiler machinist, carrier radio operator. Not without reason our calculation was nicknamed Quartet by the ship's wit, meaning the heroes of the famous Krylov's fable. It was offensive, of course, but nothing could be done. We stopped being called that only after we shot down the first fascist airplane. Having changed from the watch at the machine gun, I went up to the bridge to check the condition of the night sights, for which I was still responsible. In a clumsy yellow English raglan, shaped like a bell, signalman Onokov squeezed into the narrow span between the bridge overhang and the starboard sighting. Veniamin, I addressed him. Don't bend the knobs of the proofreading handwheels. You're piling on the viewfinder like a bear. I'm tired, Pyotr. I'm finishing my second shift and all to no avail. Be patient. We'll find it. Talking to me, Onokov kept his binoculars on his eyes. Visibility was poor. Over the dim sea, ruffled by the cold wind, hung muddy streaks of rain. Low clouds swayed over the masts of the Gremyshny. Suddenly Onokov pushed me to the side and grabbed the horizontal sighting wheel. I was about to reprimand him for such arbitrariness, but I didn't have time. I see a ship. In half an hour our ships approached the lone transport. To the north of it we recognized the silhouettes of 2 more ships. Gurin ordered the steamers to enter the ice. Gremyshny and Grozny, pushing apart the ice floes, covered the transports from the sea. Again we were going in a silent rumble. The ice turned out to be pack ice multi-year strong. When we came closer, we were amazed by the bright blue of these ice floes. Few of us knew at that time that such ice was as hard as granite. Alexander Mikhailovich Vasiliev listened to the scraping and cringed. We'll strip all the paint off the sides. We'll paint it again, Gurin reassured him. But if the fascists killed the transport, it could not be resurrected. At the beginning of the second day of the ice voyage, the convoy was on the meridian of Ayokanga, hundreds of miles north of it. From Gremyshny, the captains of the ships were given the order to go to clear water, where by that time our destroyers were. However, the transports were still going in the ice. That's how the Nazis scared them, shook his head Vasiliev. Onokov, tell the captains that they are under the protection of Gremyshny, which has not yet allowed the loss of any transports. Onokov tapped the searchlight flaps in an instant. In a minute, the transports, as if on command, all of a sudden simultaneously began to turn around and lie down on a course leading to clear water. It is difficult to say what influenced the captain's decision, whether it was the message about the burden, whether it was the deterioration of the weather, or whether it was common sense in general. Having taken the found ships to the base, Gremyashchi and Grozny went out in search of other transports of the convoy PQ-17. 8th day we are at sea. The faces of the sailors have turned pale and grey. We have to wash ourselves with salty sea water. It makes our hands and cheeks crusty. And then there is the wind, cold and prickly. We dream of a warm cabin, a hot shower and a peaceful sleep as something unattainable. We found an American transport near the rocky, sullen shore of Novaya Zemlya. We found nothing else. About the fate of this convoy could tell us a lot of ordinary American and British sailors, but their officers forbade them any communication with us. They were afraid of the truth. Already at that time, we Soviet sailors realized that the Allies were playing a foul game, talking a lot about helping the Soviet people enduring the full weight of the struggle with Nazi Germany. They did very little. Convoys at sea were suffering huge losses. The Allies took care of their warships, not caring at all about the ships carrying cargoes for the heroic Soviet army. That is why the transports were easy prey for fascist pirates. How can the British and Americans so calmly abandon their comrades in distress, we wondered, hearing about the destruction of transports with their crews? We Soviet people could not understand it in any way. Our group of ships was returning from the edge of pack ice, leading the last transports to the big land. We intended to go to Iokanga, Fool. It was a quiet white night. A fog hung over the sea, resembling a thin smoke veil. We were approaching Cape Kanin Nose, where enemy submarines were expected to appear. Sailors looked with all their eyes whether on the surface of the sea a periscope rod with a slash of a white storm would appear. The fascist submariners did not dare to attack us. But suddenly 5 enemy bombers attacked our ships. We met them with fierce fire. The planes were repulsed, but from the close explosions of large aircraft bombs our ship and Sokrishitelny were damaged. The gyrocompass and the second rangefinder were out of order on the Gremyashchi. In this battle, anti-aircraft gunners destroyer Kuibyshev shot down a Nazi bomber. The multi-day campaign to rescue the remains of the convoy PQ-17 ended. Kanin Nose. Its gloomy high shore will forever remain in the memory. In September 1942, 4 Soviet destroyers Gremyashchi, Sokrishitelny, Kuibyshev and Uritsky in the open sea met a large convoy of ships bound for Arkhangelsk. 29 transports and tankers were guarded by only 6 British warships. That's a bit small. Of each ship hung a sausage-like barrage balloon. In the battles we were convinced that these balloons are a weak obstacle to enemy aircraft. Our ships joined in guarding the caravan, covering it from the stern left and right. In the evening, far above the horizon appeared enemy air scout. We were wary the battle to be. However, the night passed quietly. In the morning the land appeared. Its narrow strip seemed to rise from the sea as we approached. The shore was rising higher and higher. Kanin Nos is a stony plateau, its precipitous slopes rising high above the water. The anti-aircraft gunners stood at their battle stations. The battery commander, Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Stasenko, did not let his binoculars out of his hands. His subordinates looked at him, waiting for commands. Stasenko is a thinking, enterprising officer. He introduced many innovations on the battery. We used to shoot in the so-called table method. The calculation of anti-aircraft rangefinder reported the distance and angle of the target. The data were plotted on a tablet, and then began searching for a solution on special tables, which made up 2 thick volumes. Sailor Gashuta had one of them, and I had the other. I had to, digging in the endless rows of numbers, to determine the sight setting, and Gashuta the sight and tube setting. The obtained values we transmitted by telephone to the battery. All this took a lot of time. In addition, in the reflection of dive bombers' tables in general were useless. Combat at his own risk changed the methods of firing. Now, the data received from rangefinders I reported directly to the battery. the first to strike 2 engine torpedo carriers. They went low over the water. Then the same huge bombers came out of the clouds. I barely have time to transmit to the commander data on all the emerging targets. Fire. The right anti-aircraft gun made a deafening bang and rolled back. A shell casing flew out and hit me on the legs. I stood back, keeping my ear to the intercom. Another shot. The casing hits me on the knee. Quickly I climb onto the crane, first shots ring out. There is such a rumble around that there is no time to pay attention to the inconvenience. In the sky is crowded from the caps of ruptures, from the glowing lines of bullet and shell tracks. Torpedo bearers continue to fly the same course. Suddenly our main caliber guns went off. For the first time we shot at planes from these guns. It turned out well. 130mm remote projectiles exploded over the water, raising columns of spray and shrapnel in the path of torpedo carriers. And the planes were forced to drop their cargo from a decent distance. On the bridge, Gurin listened sensitively to the reports of signallers. "Torpedo trace on the right side of the bow," shouted Fokiv. And a few seconds later Onokov reported, "Torpedo aft." And again Fokiv's anxious voice, "Torpedo along the side." Gremyshchevertko dodged torpedoes without ceasing to fire on the aircraft. Part of the torpedo carriers, having met a continuous curtain of fire of Soviet destroyers, bypassed it and tried to attack from another direction. But even here before them stood a wall of fire. Bombers meanwhile dropped bombs and machine-gunned the ships. Our anti-aircraft gunners were firing at them. One of the bombers rushed to our ship. The automatic rifle of Petty Officer Babich was beating on it without ceasing. Babich, with a black model airplane mounted on a rod, silently entered the correction, bringing the route of shells to the belly of the fascist bomb carrier. And finally the glowing long line caught up with the airplane. It swayed and, lurching on the wing, fell into the sea with a stone. The water around us boomed with the explosions of shells. Pressing my ear to the mouthpiece of the intercom, I look around. Empty shell casings are flying on the deck with a ringing sound. I see how with each shot the gun barrels are getting blacker and blacker. The paint on them is about to catch fire. And then, like a whip, I was whipped on the shoulder. I see the antenna wire. It must have been broken by a piece of shrapnel. I didn't have time to report it, as I noticed 2 nimble figures on the bridge at the direction finder's cabin. They are radio operators Petty Officer Teslenko and Sailor Marshigin. They quickly, as if nothing had happened, stretched a spare antenna between the superstructures and again disappeared behind the deckhouse door. They and attack torpedo carriers. They fly only 3 to 5 meters away. We can not shoot at them, we can hit the transports. Gurin leads Gremyshche out of the marching order, and we rush towards the enemy planes. Now all our guns can fire. A victory shout runs through the ship. One of the Heinkel wing flicked the water and disappeared into the abyss. Above the place of his death remained only a dark cloud of smoke. The anti-aircraft bridge is covered with shell casings. Artillerymen do not have the opportunity to remove them. Torpedo gunners, chemists, coxswains rush to the rescue. Standing in a chain, they, throwing from hand to hand hot bronze glasses, quickly cleaned the gun platforms. Ocean Transport Kentucky lagged behind the caravan. A bomb blast had torn its stern apart. From the hole was not that smoke or steam. From the left machine gun, commanded by Petty Officer Domrin, came an anxious and demanding shout. "The ammunition is running out. Give me shells." The ship's Commissar Rozhkov was already running here, followed by several sailors of the emergency party, radio operators, and a sanitary instructor. Manually they began to feed shells from the cellar. In the heat of battle the sailors did not wait for instructions, they did what was necessary. Noticing that the attachment of depth bombs had been torn off, Petty Officer Osipov, under a hail of shrapnel, ran aft and restored order. When the miner returned to the 4th gun, it was terrible to look at him. His face, arms, chest were covered with abrasions and bruises. While he was working aft, he was knocked off his feet several times by the blast wave. We didn't see it as a big deal. If our own ship was in danger, that's what any of us would do. The fighting was dying down. Rattling headed for the damaged transport. But an English destroyer was ahead of us. Through binoculars I could see how the crew of the transport Pease on the upper deck of the approaching ship. And then artillery shots were heard. The crew of the British destroyer was shooting the transport so as not to bother with its towing. A few minutes later, the big steamer sank, swinging goodbye to the cross of the massive mast. Not the Nazis, so the Allies sank the transport with valuable cargo, which was so much awaited in Arkhangelsk. By this time the convoy had already passed the traverse of Kanin Nose and began to pull into the throat of the White Sea. Only now we had a chance to take a break and smoke a cigarette. The excited voices of the sailors were heard on the deck. Our rattling was now really rattling. A cursed place here, at Cape Kanin Nose. That depends on who it's for. For fascists, a fact. That's right. In this battle, the fascists lost 15 airplanes. 3 of them were shot down by us, 2 by the anti-aircraft gunners of Sokrishitelny. But in view of the fact that the 3rd torpedo carrier was fired from Gremishi and Kubyshev, we conceded this victory to the crew of the old destroyer. It was, perhaps, fair and noble. Having escorted the convoy to Arkhangelsk, in a few days we again found ourselves at Kanin Nose. Everyone on the bridge and on the upper deck looked warily at the horizon. Here we could expect trouble. At 5:23 a.m., the signalman Veniamin Onokov, our most keen and most tireless observer, saw an air bubble in the dark part of the horizon and rolled towards the Gremishi. The sailor shouted, "Torpedo. On the left. It's coming at us." Watch Officer Senior Lieutenant Vladimir Pavlovich Korotkevich immediately reduced the ship's speed and ordered to shift the rudder. We watched the foamy path with horror. Would we not have time to turn away? Rattling, obeying the rudder, began to turn. Onokov continuously reported on the movement of the torpedo. Its trace went along the side of the destroyer. Resourcefulness and accurate calculation of the officer of the watch saved the ship. We saw how ran up to the bridge commander, a minute away in the navigator's cabin, shook hands with the senior lieutenant, hugged him. We did not find the submarine. It was hiding somewhere. There was no time to search for it, and the ship was on the set course. Each of us wanted to say something nice to Officer Korotkevich, but the bridge is no place for expressing feelings. The sailors transferred all their joy and gratitude to Veniamin Onokov, who had changed his watch. We literally squeezed him. Someone, it seems Nikolai Afonin, asked the sailor, "Tell me, Venia, was it painful when you noticed the torpedo?" I won't deny it, I had that. Vibrated. I felt thirsty for some reason, my mouth felt dry, and my back tingled with frost. We weren't laughing. Well, everyone gets scared when they see death with their own eyes. Brave is not the one who is not afraid of anything, but the one who can overcome fear and in a moment of danger to do their job, caring about the ship, about their fighting friends. His assistant Alexander Mikhailovich Vasiliev Gurin once gave such a characteristic except for the good. Nothing else about Vasiliev I cannot say. In short, he is pure of heart and loves the sea. Not everyone could count on such an assessment from the lips of our commander. We, sailors, were afraid of strict Alexander Mikhailovich and sincerely loved him. We especially liked his wit, resourcefulness, inexhaustible cheerfulness. We never heard from him neither scolding nor boring moralizing. And without them he knew how to influence our brother. I remember it was winter. The weather was going crazy. The night before the sun was shining, but in the morning it began to snow, and the wind was howling. The sailors, cursing, were sweeping snowy mush from the deck. Grigory Babich, an anti-aircraft gunner, was walking near his gun. The cold heated his face to a cherry colour. The commander stiffened. He moved back and forth more nimbly, stomping his feet to warm them up. But even that did not help. And now the brave artilleryman hit the deck with his boot and began to pound out the bull's eye fractionally. And so well as, perhaps, he could not manage at amateur concerts. Senior Lieutenant Vasiliev was sitting in his cabin, making a combat training plan, when the bull's eye rumbled over his head. It's Babich. Alexander Mikhailovich guessed. Only he can do that, and the shot over the sub-cabin resembled machine gun bursts. You can't work hard in such an environment. Wait. Vasiliev threatened. He put on a raglan and a hat. He left the cabin and called the messenger. Petty Officer Babich to me. The messenger rushed to carry out the order. Vasiliev stopped in the corridor and thought about what to do with Babich. He didn't want to reprimand him. He was a good sailor, and the offence was trifling. In a minute, Babich came running. I've arrived at your orders. It's for you, Comrade Babich. Come into my cabin, I'll be right back. Alexander Mikhailovich went up to the half-boat and, calling to himself several commodores who were cleaning the deck, said to them, "Dance." The sailors stared incomprehensibly at the assistant commander. He had to tell them what he had in mind. After that, the sailors started dancing with great pleasure. Grigory Babich was sitting in the cabin, squirming, clasping his hands over his ears, and looking at the stern with horror. There was a tremendous rumble in the cabin, as if dozens of pneumatic hammers were hammering rivets into the deck. But the rumbling ceased as suddenly as it had begun. Babich looked up and saw Vasiliev. Jumping up from his chair, the anti-aircraft gunner exclaimed in a broken voice, "Comrade Senior Lieutenant, everything is clear. It won't happen again." "That's right," grinned the assistant commander. Babich flew out of the senior lieutenant's quarters in a whirlwind. This method of education worked without fail. ... The ship was at the roadstead, and fresh water was released strictly according to the schedule only for the galley and wash basins. It was lunchtime. The officer of the watch gave the signal to wash hands. But the water did not flow from the taps the bilge machinists forgot to turn on the pump. When Vasiliev found out about it, he looked in on the chief mechanic Rotenfeld and called in a mysterious whisper, "Mark Samuilovich, would you come and see me?" "Coming." When the commander of the electromechanical combat unit stepped over the coamings of the cabin, Vasiliev closed the door tightly behind him and turned the key in the lock. The senior mechanic became wary. "Would you like a drink?" Alexander Mikhailovich asked in a low voice. Rotenfeld glanced at his watch. It's lunchtime, if only for appetite. A shot wouldn't hurt. Alexander Mikhailovich took a blue Turkish decanter with a high neck out of the cupboard and half-poured glasses. "Alcohol?" the mechanic asked. Alexander Mikhailovich nodded affirmatively. "To those at sea," proclaimed Rotenfeld, tipped the contents of the glass into his mouth and rushed to the wash basin. Turned off the faucet, put the glass. Not a drop. The gasping mechanic rushed to the door. But it was blocked by a laughing Vasiliev. Mark Samuilovich, mouth wide open, waved his palms in front of him. "Water." A sip of water. "And you, Mark Samuilovich, ask your bilge drivers for water. Let them, though 15 minutes late, but let the water flow. Your subordinates have forgotten their duties." The chief mechanic grabbed the telephone receiver. In a minute, a cheerful trickle spurted out of the wash basin faucet. "Now drink to your heart's content," said Vasiliev. "There's no need." "It's gone." Grinned the senior mechanic and watched Vasiliev pour the alcohol from his glass into the long-necked blue decanter. It was never again that the bilge machinists were late in supplying water to the wash basins and galley. It happens like this in battle. A sailor is a good man, skillful, brave, disciplined. But when there is a respite, it is as if the man has been replaced. Pavel Morozov, the commander of the 4th gun, was like that. And he was a good guy, docile, kind, but suddenly out of the blue, he would freak out. He would be rude to a comrade out of nothing to do. He would do some cleaning, forget to clean the buttons on his coat, or do something else just out of mischief. To his friends he used to say, "I prefer to be closer to the galley, away from the chiefs, and sleep when the situation is not clear." Morozov did not go for more to the cook. He had to sleep not more, but sometimes less than others. At the commanders he was on the radar, well as the best dispenser artillery calculation. He was once even praised in the Navy newspaper, and he read the note, smiling childishly. Still, no one had so many ridiculous stories as he did. Once Petty Officer Afonin decided to clean up the cabin. It happened during the campaign, when the sea was rocking the destroyer. The petty officer called Morozov upstairs from the cockpit and ordered, "Wash the mops properly." Aye. The foreman left, and Pavel went to the crane with the instrumentation material. Having unwound a thin cord, he tied it to the stems of 3 mops and threw them into the boiling storm behind the stern. "It'll wash them so that they'll be cleaner than handkerchiefs," he said. A few minutes later, Afonin shouted, "Bring the mops here, to the gun." Morozov began to choose a rope quickly. He took out only cuttings. The hemp kabolki, the beards of the mops, disappeared. The storm had eaten them clean. The sailor stared at the empty sticks and scratched the back of his head in confusion. "Well, how long will I wait?" Afonin hurried. "Where are the mops?" "There." Pavel waved confusedly over the stern. "Here's a trick." This trick cost Morozov 1 outfit out of turn. Another time, sailor Pavel Morozov was not at the evening watch. Where could he be? He had nowhere to go. Gремиши was at the roadstead. We thought that the sailor might have fallen asleep somewhere in a nook. So we searched the whole ship. In the midst of our search, the signalman received a semaphore from the tanker Zhiliabov, "Take your lover." "I'm leaving for Murmansk." The tanker was 2 miles from our side. A duty boat was equipped to it. The rowers, cursing Pavel for the broken rest, approached the tanker. Morozov stood at the bulwark and shouted, "Push on." "Well, a little more." "Let us get to you, we'll pile on," said sailor Tarabarin. Morozov got into the dinghy with complete silence of his comrades, but while he was making his way to the tank, he received a light slap from each rower. Afonin, however, squeamishly threw, "You should at least wipe the lipstick off your cheek. Shame on you." With difficulty we found out the circumstances of the case. Pavel had long ago taken a fancy to a black-haired barmaid from the tanker Zhiliabov. In the afternoon, when the tanker was standing at the side of the Gremishki, giving us oil, Morozov, having found a free minute and some pretext, snuck onto the Zhiliabov. The girl did not charge signs of sailor attention. This hurt the Commodore, and he declared until she gives him one, the most harmless kiss, he will never get off the tanker. It was said, of course, in jest, but the girl decided to teach the annoying gentleman a lesson. Referring to business, she left, having discreetly locked Morozov in the cabin. Pavel waited for her for a long time, and when the barmaid came in, laughing, splashing her full hands, the sailor was taken aback. In the open door of the cabin he saw the distant board of the Gremeni. The tanker was leaving for the roadstead. "That's a lesson for you." "Laughing," said the girl. "And so that you wouldn't be offended for the wick, which you'll definitely get, here's for you." She kissed Morozov's pale cheekbone. But Pavel didn't care about that anymore. He rushed out on deck. This courtesy visit to the tanker cost him 5 extraordinary orders from the assistant commander of the ship. Since then, Morozov could not look calmly at the tanker, and if it happened that the Zhiliabov moored on the starboard side of the Gremieshi, Morozov went only on the port side. The incident on the tanker left a deep trace in the commander's soul. To tell the truth, Pavel did not suffer from remorse. He was sure that he would be bent by cases only until the next battle, and then he would show himself, and everything would be forgiven. But few of us really knew the soul of this big kid. He was the first to refuse the sailors' money due to him, donating it in favor of orphans whose parents died in the war. To Pavel's joy, everyone followed his lead. We found out that Morozov loves children very much, and after the service he is thinking of becoming a teacher. "Wait a minute," we told him. "The war is not over yet. There's no telling what might happen to the Gremieshi." "There will be one thing," he answered confidently. "Hitler will be kaput. And there all the ways will be open to us, as to the wind in the sea." We knew well the stern temper of the Arctic Ocean. He strictly accustomed us to order, And that's why Morozov and everyone who was out of order got a hard time from his friends. Once the ocean taught a good lesson to the signalman sailor Viktor Rulev. We went out to sea in marvelous weather. Viktor treated the preparation of his department for the campaign in a poor way. But when the island of Kildin remained behind the stern of the Gremishi, a squall came. Waves with furious force hit the board. And suddenly the destroyer began to lurch. The bridge reported. Water is coming into the first deck. On the face of helmsman, even pimples turned white. He realized that he had not checked how the portholes were sealed. Asking permission from the petty officer, the signalman ran downstairs. Poking his head through the hatch, he saw a terrible picture. Water was squelching and foaming in the cockpit. Someone's bunk rolled up, boots and other things were floating. One of the sailors was fiddling at the porthole. As soon as the destroyer tilted to starboard, through the gap from under the loose round lid to the cockpit burst powerful jets of water. Rulev rushed to help his comrade. Painfully banged his knee on the wheelhouse. The signalman reached for the thumbscrews, tried to wrap them. But they did not give in. It seemed that the threads had rusted. "It's the first time I've seen water running under a lying oak," muttered his comrade. "You, Rulev, this mess yourself, and I have to go to the anti-aircraft gunners." "Go to the devil." Viktor boiled up. His fingers were sore from the effort, and the nuts still did not want to turn. Drenched and angry, Rulev fidgeted around the cabin, looking for a suitable lever. The door opened and the head of his comrade, who had left, appeared in the hatch. "Here," he shouted, tossing Rulev a long screwdriver. "Don't forget to return it to the anti-aircraft gunners." Rulev picked up the screwdriver on the fly, inserted it into the ring of the lug. In a minute the water pressure weakened, and soon stopped altogether. The comrade shook his head and said reproachfully, "You have forgotten, Viktor, the sailor's rule if you go to sea. Prepare for a storm. The sea has taught you that you should not flap your ears like a common animal in Asia." Yes, the sea is no joke. I see how the half bank of Rattle goes under water. A grey wave covers the turret of the first gun. Then the bow of the destroyer rises to the surface with a jerk. And the first thing that catches my eye is the funnel with the cable blown up on the butt. It's blown off. I shout at the top of my voice, though the watch officer Senior Lieutenant Korotkevich stands near me and also looks at the half bank. "Bosun to the bridge," he ordered over the telephone. A huge reel, with a steel cable wound on it, rumbles on the deck. A wave pushed it. With all its might the reel struck the shield of the bow gun. A crack snaked across the steel plate. Bouncing off the shield, the creeper arched and came crashing down on the graceful windlasses. It bent half a dozen of them mercilessly, then swung around and struck the spire. "What a madwoman," shouted Fokiv, bringing his rippled face close to my ear. "She can make a mess of us." Pavel Andreevich Rechkin, the shruggy, slightly stooped bosun of the Gremishi, wanted to run to the half bank, but Korotkevich did not let him go alone. Then the midshipman took with him the most agile and strong Apka Pelivinian. He was a brave, dense-built sailor with iron muscles. His favourite saying was, "Our Russian neither jokes with sword nor with kalaka. Neither do we Armenians." As soon as Rechkin and Pelivanian appeared from behind the shield of the bow gun, the Vyushka seemed to have been waiting for it. It rolled right at them. The sailors nimbly hid behind the shield. Slowing its run at the superstructure, the creeper suddenly rushed to the empty board. The midshipman and petty officer ran up to her to hold her back, but the ship tilted to the other side, and the swell began to pounce threateningly on the bosun. Hardly had he dodged it when a wave came in, knocked the midshipman off his feet, and dragged him to the cut of the half-tank. "Man overboard," I shouted. But not so our bosun. At the very last moment he managed to grab hold of something. In a moment he was back at the unruly reel. "Throw it on," shouted the midshipman to the petty officer. Pelivanian put the thin hemp end around the reel. The bosun wrapped another rope around it. The sailors pulled the bundle to the gangway, under the cut of the half-bank, to wedge it between the railings. She moved obediently at first, but at the end she slid again to the side, breaking another windlass with a crunch, with the evident intention of falling overboard. Polivanian crouched in front of her in an instant and held her up with his shoulder. With a rumbling crash, the Vyushka tumbled down the gangway. She did not move again. After listening to the bosun's report on the fulfillment of the order, the watch commander rebuked him. This is how it happens that a small mistake leads to a big disaster. The owner of the funnel before the ship went to sea did not put an additional fastener on it, and you had to deal with your sides. The bosun was sporting a grey moustache and looked like an angry old walrus. Upkar leaned back against the mast, the whites of his eyes gleaming in his darkened face. There was no doubt that the sailor who had charge of the unfortunate vent was in for a rough ride, and rightfully so. The wind howled over the icy shore. Sailors Petukov and Mostetsov, shivering from the cold, were wandering near the foaming strip of surf, looking greedily at the Gremishchi, standing in the roadstead, dreaming of warmth and food. The destroyer was humming with fans. All the boats were hoisted on board and fastened in a stormy way the ship was preparing to unanchor. The sailors realized that if they asked to send a yawl for them, it could delay the destroyer's departure into the sea. 2 sailors were on shore because they went to the workshop for some parts. "Victor, look," rejoiced Petukov. "A boat." The friends examined the overturned fishing boat. There was nothing to do. "Let's try." The sailors overturned the wretched craft, dragged it to the water. Having chosen the moment, they pushed off the edge of the ice floe. But the wave immediately threw the boat on the ice. Sailors repeated the attempt, piled on the oars. There was a crack. It was Pavel's oar that broke. What now? Mostetsov asked confusedly, looking at the broken oar. "We'll have to semaphore the ship," answered Petukov. "Give me your hat." Wielding 2 hats instead of flags, Pavel began to write. No one obliged him to learn the semaphore alphabet. He mastered it because of his love for the sea, and now it suddenly came in handy. Watch Officer Gavrilov, watching the sailors on shore from the bridge, read the oar has broken. We're going ashore to the cape. This cape was far from the berth, but close to the ship only 200 meters away, but it was not easy to get to it on foot over rocks and ice piles. It is not right for sailors to be afraid of the sea. The officer shook his head. He called the signalman Okov to him. "Make a new oar out of whatever you can find. Keep downwind from the shore. Report to the ship immediately." The senior lieutenant knew his subordinates. Both Petukov and Mostetsov could grumble and sometimes break the uniform, but if they were ordered to, they would break down and do everything as it was supposed to be done. Having received their commander's orders, the sailors looked at each other. Mostetsov sighed. "Let's think. We must reach the ship no matter what it costs us." "Fact," Petukov agreed. They rummaged around on the shore. Under the snow they found a wooden bar, and with a pity they used it instead of an oar. The boat was tossed on the wave, flooded with water. The sailors were soaked, but now they did not notice the cold. They rowed and rowed. The most difficult thing was to approach so that the boat was not tossed overboard by the wave. With a bar instead of an oar, it's not easy to steer the little boat. But the sailors dodged, at the right moment turned the boat, and the wind neatly carried it to the hull of the destroyer. "Well done," greeted the sailor's watch officer. "It is true what they say that without ingenuity a sailor is not a sailor." In a few minutes Gremishchi dropped anchor. "Valenki, Valenki." "Eh?" "The old ones are not sewn on." The singer's voice described the guy's misfortune with gusto. You can't go to your sweetheart on a date in skinny shoes. We started playing this record at the next concert after our return from the sea. But then the song stopped. The voice of the announcer broke into the silence of the wardroom. We continue the concert at the request of our crew members. At the request of the Chief of the Intendant's Service, Comrade Sharapov, we repeat the song Valenki. And in the officers' quarters the joyful melody was again flowing. Vasiliev, Ivashenko, Klyopin, Rotenfeld, who were sitting at the big table, involuntarily stomped their feet to its tune. The officers were dining. Suddenly everyone shuddered at the far round table dishes clinked sharply. It was our narcos Sergei Ignatievich Sharapov angrily threw a spoon into the plate. "I didn't order such a song," he boiled. Sharapov rose from the table and hastily went out into the corridor to the telephone. "Stop playing that record," shouted Narcos into the phone. "I say, Sharapov, what fool told you that I ordered such nonsense?" "What a cranberry," laughed Vasiliev. "At least a joke, at least a laugh, but it would be a success." Anatoly Ivanovich Kayupin smiled enigmatically. He did not finish. Everyone laughed when they saw the angry face of Sergei Ignatievich returning to the wardroom. Senior Lieutenant Sharapov was shouty and fussy, but in general, a good-natured man. We liked him. There was never a bad lunch or dinner on Gremyashchi. In summer, fresh vegetables appeared on the Gremyashchi earlier than on other ships of the division. Never on the destroyer was not delayed in issuing items of sailor uniforms. The senior lieutenant worried about it himself and raced his service. The rear men of the base among themselves called him only by his surname, and threw out the first letter of it apparently. The assertiveness of our narcos had spoiled a lot of blood for them. But if they had said that about Sergei Ignatievich in front of the sailors from the Gremyashchi, there would have been a scandal. We stood by our ship's intendant. And now someone made a joke of him like that. They did it to spite me. Boiled the senior lieutenant, habitually raising his finger. It's a hint. Or the right hint. Kolyupin shook the smile off his face. "By your grace, Sergei Ignatievich, my commanders are on watch in tattered felt boots in the cold." The ship's gunnery officer rang the bell in the fifth cabin and summoned Commandant Vasily Nestorovsky to the wardroom. Huge, broad-shouldered, he soon appeared in the wardroom, bent, so as not to inadvertently hit his head something. "Show your boots to Senior Lieutenant Sharapov," ordered the sailor Hayupin. Nestorovsky stared questioningly at the commander of his combat unit, then shifted his gaze to the narcos. "Don't be shy. We finished dinner," encouraged the Commandant Navigator Ivashenko, our recognized legislator in matters of ethics. The sailor lifted up his big leg. At the place where the soul should be, in the fore and aft part of the Valenki, there were holes. And the singer burst into tears. "Valenki, Valenki. A, the old ones are not sewn up." "Did you see it, Sergei Ignatievich?" asked the lieutenant captain. "Yes," stretched out the narcos. "And I've brought new ones. A whole batch. Where are they?" "Wah," in the wardroom. "I didn't have time to order them to be distributed to the right people." Sharapov squinted. "But I won't give out the boots until I find out who ordered to play this damned record." Klyopin turned to Sharapov with his whole body and said, "So please order it as soon as possible." I ordered the record. The song about felt boots is over. There were Allied ships on the roadstead. There were aircraft carriers and cruisers, destroyers and corvettes, frigates and minesweepers. Not far from the Gremini anchored English corvette. From its deck came sharp, jerky sounds. We stopped our cleaning and raised our heads. The English sailors, we called them Royal Sailors, were showing their goods. Their jazz was tearing the silence of the bay to shreds. Trumpets howled, saxophones bellowed. The drummer pounded his sticks like a madman. A sailor in a calfskin coat was beating a charleston with the hems of his lacquered shoes on a depth charge. "To you say," whistled Sivalov, wiping his sweating face with his mitten. His black eyes with long girl-like lashes squinted mockingly. Watch Officer Gavrilov, who had come to check the quality of cleaning, asked the sailors. "What is the music?" "Pid-TC rumble," Sivalov replied, twisting a mop over the scupper. "Tilki Jonaman dance. Go to the raid, Comrade Senior Lieutenant." And when the foxtrot started, all the animals went to the water. They love real music. Jazz, as if choking, stopped. "Hello," shouted a sailor dancer from the corvette. Senior Lieutenant Gavrilov leisurely came aboard. From the Englishman's gesticulations, he realized that the Allies were calling the Soviet sailors to a dinghy competition. ... And now Senior Lieutenant Gavrilov, the commander of our prize dinghy, took the 6-oared yawl to the start. The corvette's bellboat was already there. Boris Vladimirovich looked at his rowers with an appraising glance. A dense and stout Sivelob sat on the right rower. Next to him was the giant Tarabarin. The rest of them were also like them. They would not let them down. But Gavrilov noticed the English bellboat is much lighter than our heavy dinghy. "Sailors," said the officer excitedly. "Let's stand for the honor of the ship, for the honor of the Soviet flag." Oars, like bayonets, bristled yawl and bellboat. Both Russians and Englishmen prepared to row. The red tail of the signal flare was still melting in the air, and both boats were already rushing forward. "Pile on," shouted Gavrilov, looking at the bellboat that was slowly rounding the yawl. The oars were bending in arcs. The 6 were on a par with the bellboat. From astern came the murmuring of water. The English officer, lanky and gaunt like his sailors, fidgeted in his seat. He often turned his white, sallow face toward the Russians, gleaming with his oval black horn-rimmed spectacles. Minutely correcting them, the British officer said something hastily to his rowers. They were doing their best. Our dinghy was ahead of the British. Gavrilov defiantly put his hand to the visor of his cap. Suddenly, with a quiet crack, the leather slings burst under his feet. Losing his footing, Sivelob fell on his comrades, knocking them off the pace of rowing. The dinghy turned to the right. Shifting the rudder, Gavrilov corrected its position. But the previously achieved speed was lost. English bellboat bypassed our 6. The senior lieutenant was biting his lips in silence, looking at the British officer's gesture. Understandable in all the fleets of the world, the Englishman mockingly showed the end of the Manila cable, say, "Let's take you in tow." Jazz on the corvette gave a deafening howl. Frowning guiltily, Sivelob sharply brought his oar. But the oar stroke turned out to be half strength. "Comrade Senior Lieutenant," he pleaded. "Pridavite mini nogi, bo al paraviruetsia." The officer measured the distance to the corvette's bow. "That's the finish line." There was about half the distance left. "There's no reason to panic," he said to the sailors. "Push on." Now Gavrilov, with his knees, pressed Sivelob's legs to the boardfish, and with his hands helped the rowers to make such jerks, after which the 6 raced forward. The steam from the heated bodies of the rowers wafted. From all the ships were pointed binoculars and stereo telescopes to the place where the Soviet 6-oar yawl and the British bellboat fought at the oars for the honor of their sea flags. Not everyone, of course, saw at once how the English officer removed the end of the Manila cable from the stern and shouted at his rowers. And the louder his guttural voice rang out, the quieter the jazz sounded. It was clear that our 6 were catching up with the British again. The forefoot of the yawl had already equalled the stern of the bellboat. Gavrilov ordered the foreman of the dinghy to shift the rudder to bypass the British to the left, but, to his surprise, they turned in the same direction. It was a dishonest trick the English wanted to block the way for our sailors, to throw them off the pace. Well, the Soviet officer was angry. He gave the command to steer and ordered the rowers. Oars on the side. At last the yawl was to the right of the bellboat. The Soviet sailors took the oars out of the water and swung them in unison. The oars creaked. The 6 went forward. Now the British were squinting at the line thrown over the transom board by Senior Lieutenant Gavrilov. The British officer spat in the water with annoyance, took out a cigarette and smoked. His sailors realized that the fight was over and rowed a little. The cross flag of Great Britain sagged languidly. On the utes of the burdened sailors shook the rowers. Excited voices buzzed. "Well done? Well done. I knew they didn't have the guts to compete with us. Brothers, and the British think the Russians are bad sailors." Who's talking? Their bellboat is probably 5 or 6 poods lighter than our yawl. Suddenly the conversation stopped at once. From behind the corvette a familiar bellboat turned out, heading for the Gremeni. In a few minutes an English officer came on deck. He spoke loudly, pointing with his hand then at our dinghy, then at his own dinghy. The commander of the English dinghy Gavrilov translated the hot speech of the guest, expresses doubts about our victory. He says that we cheated him. Why is that? Tarabarin asked. The officer claims that our dinghy is lighter than the Velbot. So why don't they take our dinghy? And we'll take their dinghy and compete, suggested Sivalov. Let's go up and see who's who. These words caused an explosion of sailors' laughter. The English officer shrugged his bony shoulders incomprehensibly. Gavrilov translated the Russian sailor's proposal to him. The Briton nodded his head excitedly. All right. The new race was repeated the next day. Now the red-starred Soviet naval flag soared above the British Velbot. Our sailors diligently dismantled the oars. Why are there no spare oars here? Wondered Sivalov. Probably their friends forgot to leave them. Tarabarin also frowned. Businesslike examining the accessories of the Velbot, he reported to Senior Lieutenant Gavrilov in a low voice. All heavy objects the English deliberately put on the bow, so that during the races Velbot burrowed into the water. The water squelched under the feet of our sailors. Hey guys, is the moisture there? Lifting the edge of the lattice fish, Sivalov fumbled in the water for a half-filled cork. It became clear to him that the English had deliberately turned it away before exchanging dinghies. Tarabarin's always calm, cheekbone face turned white with anger this time. What allies? It's a well-known matter. As with the second front, hope for allies, but do not fail yourself. The dinghies set off. With a hiss and a crackle, the rocket burst. Jazz rang out on the deck of the English corvette. The rowers swung their oars. The corvette cut the water silently. Gavrilov did not look back. He chuckled to himself, realizing that for the British was not under the strength of our heavy dinghy. Never before the senior lieutenant listened with such pleasure to the fading sounds of jazz. It was clear to him that the Allies were falling irreparably behind. Suddenly the jazz spewed out rippling sounds. Gavrilov flinched, but not from this. Sivalov's oar burst with a crack. The sailor showed the senior lieutenant the place of the break. The shaft of the oar had been half obliterated at the point of contact with the bale. The calculation was simple. As soon as the rower pressed harder, the oar would not hold. As if exhausted, the boat was slowing down. The yawl was approaching, and it could be heard by the creaking of the bows. And the jazz on the corvette rattled like a madman. Steady, ordered Gavrilov. You, Sivalov, turn to face your comrades and help them. Now one of the oars was set in motion by two pairs of strong arms. Row, second. Third. The wellboat moved visibly forward. The distant thumping of the oars on the dinghy grew muffled. As if choked, the nasal saxophones died out. And the more surprising in the sudden silence sounded the words of the English officer, spoken in the purest Russian language. You are lucky. Ours got it. I remembered Suvorov's favourite words, we are Russians. We will conquer everything. Towards the Soviet sailors from the destroyer Gremishi, our majestic song of the motherland flew with a wide wave. English jazz was silent. The low-ceilinged compartment of the car was like a sailor's shower room on the destroyer. Before the war, 4 or 5 people bathed in it at a time. The war amended it. The compartment was now filled with up to 18 people. Everyone was in a hurry to wash up and do the laundry before the alarm was sounded. On Saturday, boiler machinist Vyacheslav Fomin, taking the laundry under his arm, went to the shower room. It was so crowded there that, as they say, there was no place for an apple to fall. Some sailors bathed, others here, kneeling on the red-tiled floor, diligently washed sheets, shirts, work shirts and pants. Fomin undressed and along the bulkhead squeezed into the shower room. He sat down with a young sailor with a pimply face, stretched out his hand for a brush. At that moment the bells of a loud battle rang out. Air raid. All the sailors rushed to the deck, pulling on their shorts and stripes as they went. A young sailor also ran to the fighting post. Only Fomin stayed in the shower room. He took away the work dress spread out by his neighbour and put his own instead. Only then he ran to the boiler room. The enemy planes passed by. Soon the air alert was cancelled. Fomin leisurely smoked a cigar on the ute, interbred with anti-aircraft gunners, a couple of jokes, and slowly walked to the shower room. Having washed himself, he made his way to the corner where a young sailor was labouring, and shouted at him. "You of the young, and an early one, I see. Why did you take my laundry?" "I didn't." "That's my shirt." The boiler machinist, grinning, suggested. "Come and see the battle number." To his dismay, the young sailor saw another man's mark on the pocket of the sailcloth shirt he had already washed. "This is your punishment for insolence." Fomin snatched the shirt and pants from the hands of a young comrade, and with a look of insulted dignity wanted to sniff into the locker room. He failed. Other sailors, who knew Varkoslav's malicious habit, soaped his back with a washcloth. Fomin had to get under the shower once again. And many times, as soon as he stepped to the locker room, he found himself soaked from head to toe again. "Brothers," pleaded the boiler driver, "but you'll wash me, I'll stop growing." "It's not good to grow like that," echoed Domrin. "When you've washed your neighbour's clothes, then you'll get out of here." Fomin wailed. No respect for old sailors. Is it possible to allow such a thing? But the comrades only laughed in response. I had to submit. Having washed his sailcloth pants and shirt, Fomin, to his horror, noticed that they belonged to anyone but a young sailor, because of whom the shower room and the fight broke out. Zenichik Domrin stretched out his mighty arms to the boiler engineer and murmured in a bass voice, "Thank you, Slavka, for your work. I hate to wash my working dress. Well done for helping me out. I won't forget you forever." Vyacheslav threw the shirt and pants of the artilleryman in the scupper. Parasites. Exploiters. He was indignant. The boiler operator had to start all over again. But now, before he started washing, he checked the combat number on the shirt. But his failures did not end there. As he washed the shirt and then the pants, he finally lost his temper. "What idiot slipped me these panties?" The sailors looked at what he was holding and laughed. "You bet. The owner of the clothes is a tall man. And the pants, which Vyacheslav showed to his comrades, were suitable for a teenager." So the cunning of the boiler driver was punished. Since then, Vyacheslav Fomin has lost the desire to slip his underwear or work dress to a straying comrade. Moreover, if the weather was good over the bay when he came to the shower room, the boiler engineer would ask, "Are there any anti-aircraft gunners?" "Yes. March to the combat post junkers are coming. And don't worry about the laundry. I'll wash it as if it were my own." The end of 1942 and the beginning of 1943 were marked by a great historical event, which pleased and inspired the Soviet people. At Stalingrad, our troops dealt a crushing blow to the Nazi army, after which it could not recover. In the battles near the Volga, hundreds of thousands of Hitler's soldiers and officers were captured. The polar region is far from Stalingrad, but we watched this gigantic battle with bated breath. During the broadcasts of Sovinform Bureau reports, sailors gathered in a dense crowd at the loudspeakers, afraid to miss even a word. We went to sea with a special feeling. Everyone was eager to fight to make their own, even if modest, contribution to the victory. Luckily for us, there was no shortage of combat missions. Trips followed one after another. That winter, our already skinny navigator, Captain Lieutenant Ivashenko, became even thinner and paler. When the Gremieshi was at sea, the lieutenant captain did not leave the navigator's cabin. He allowed himself to rest here, on a leather sofa, and slept no more than half an hour a day. The rest of the time, Yemyan Yanovich sat over the map. Once in a while he went up to the bridge to consult with the commander about something, and then disappeared again behind the iron door of the deckhouse, and only his slightly hoarse voice from the intercom every now and then reached the officer of the watch. We were amazed that Ivashenko answered any question from the main command post instantly and accurately. This already testified to the skill and experience of our navigator. He was then 27 years old, but his biography could be envied by many sailors. As a cadet of the Leningrad Naval School, he was on his first Arctic voyage. Then the young North Sea sailor went from Kildin Island, which is located near the Kola Bay, to Novaya Zemlya, from Cape Svaya Toy Nos to the islands of Franz Josef Land. At the Arctic island of Nadezhda, it was repeatedly rattled by a 12-point storm. The ship, on which Ivashenko was sailing at that time, almost crashed when it hit a huge iceberg that suddenly appeared out of the fog. For the trip on the ice-breaking steamer Merman to Papanin's ice floe, he was awarded the Order of the Badge of Honor. That's what kind of navigator we had. Add to the fact that Ivashenko wrote poetry, and good poems, which were eagerly printed by the fleet newspaper. Once the navigator's electrician sailor Alexander Vostrov, the navigator's cabin instrument maker, told us in strictest confidence, "Soon there will be a song about Gremishchi." "How do you know?" Sailor Chicherin, the ship's singer, asked him. "The captain-lieutenant is composing it. He writes it, reads it, tears it up and writes it again." "Well, then the song will really be Malikov," the rangefinder said with conviction. We knew Ivashenko's indomitable persistence. If he took up any task, he would not give up until the end. On the Ute, we often talked about a future song. The sailors dreamed about it aloud, speculated what they would like to hear in this song. Ivashenko listened to these conversations in silence and went to his room even more thoughtful than usual. The sailors wished to put a lot of things into the song about their native ship, and most of all, that it should contain words about our commander. In Captain Third Rank Anton Iosifovich Gurin we saw a father. All our lives we, the sailors of the Gremishchi, will remember this charming man. As soon as he appeared on deck, we tried to find a reason to meet him, to talk about something, just to say hello. The sailors of Gremishchi loved their commander, were proud of him. We owed him the combat successes of the ship. An excellent sailor, brave and wise, able to inspire people, lead them to the feat, Gurin served as a model for all of us. He was a man of exceptional honesty. He could not tolerate servility, flattery, refused the privileges due to his rank and position. In matters of honor, Anton Iosifovich was sensitive to the point of painfulness. I would call him the embodiment of honesty multiplied by the modesty of a Bolshevik. Once in a stormy campaign, Gurin did not feel well, but he still stood on the bridge, listening to the voices of watch signalers, observers and telephonists. The officers were worried about his health. I, as a messenger, was ordered by Assistant Commander Vasiliev to get pure alcohol from a paramedic and to fry the most appetizing bone in the galley with onions and garlic, and Alexander Mikhailovich warned me not to tell Gurin about all this. Our ship's paramedic Ivan Grigorievich Alexenko dissolved in alcohol some anti-prosthetic powder. Koki tried to prepare the best roast, but to my dismay our cunning failed. Smelling the shot glass, the commander squeamishly pushed it away from him. He called me over and suggested, "Drink and tell me what is poured here: alcohol, vodka or kerosene?" All the officers ducked their eyes into their plates. I alone had to answer for our conspiracy. I swallowed the fiery liquid quite bravely and coughed. Gurin, as if not noticing anything, asked, "Well, so what was in the shot glass?" The commanders sitting at the table looked at me and again clinked their forks. "Vodka, comrade captain of the third rank," I answered. To be more precise, alcohol with some foul. That is, I mean to say, with some medicine. Gurin looked suspiciously at the officers who were wielding forks more diligently than before, and, fixing his gaze on the medical officer Senior Lieutenant Alexenko, said, "I will not write off alcohol in this way, do not come to me with this. And you, Comrade Petrukin, have a bite of this wonderful mosok for the health of our medic, and that from now on I don't see such preferences for me anymore. I'll punish you." Anton Iosifovich liked to talk to the sailors on the Ute, and he did it not out of duty, but out of a heartfelt desire. Sometimes we would surround him, and he would leisurely fill a pipe, smoke a cigarette, and a heartfelt conversation about the ship, about our families, about the war would flow. We didn't hide anything from him. Once a battalion sailor Chirikov told him that he had met a good girl in Arkhangelsk. Can he marry her? The commander smiled. It's a complicated question. It's hard to advise. And you have determined for yourself who you see in this girl a friend of life, a close comrade, or just a woman? And there was a big talk about love, about family. The commander didn't lecture us. No, he just as a senior comrade shared his views on life, and that's why his words reached everyone's heart, made even the most frivolous heads think. We were conquered by his simplicity. When in the chess championship for the championship of the ship I beat him a difficult game, he was not offended. On the contrary, he proudly told the division commander. You've seen what kind of sailors I have. Well done, sightseer. But please don't let me down at the same time win against the division commander. I lost to the commander for some reason. Frankly speaking, I was confused a sailor and a captain of the second rank. But apparently the commander felt my condition and, having won the game from me, said, Anton Iosifovich, I'm playing off the score, I'm the commander. Let's consider sailor Petrukin the champion of Gremishi in chess, and you'll take the second place. That's right, echoed Gurin. So be it, commander. Not always, and not all of us had free access to it. It was the way it was supposed to be according to the regulations. But if anyone had a grudge, the sailor was comforted by the knowledge that the injustice done to him would surely reach the commander and justice would prevail. The joy and sorrow of the sailor were the joy and sorrow of the commander. Treating him as a father, we secretly regretted a little he should be older, well with grey hair at least. But he was young, energetic, bright-eyed, cheerful, with the figure of an athlete. We understood that it was better, that it was necessary a commander should be a model of strength, vigour, tirelessness. Gradually his youth ceased to embarrass us. During the campaigns, I do not remember a case when Anton Iosifovich went down to his cabin to rest. The biggest thing he allowed himself was to lie for half an hour on a narrow sofa in the navigator's cabin, dozing half-eyed. And 30 minutes later he was fully awake and up on the bridge. He himself sewed cuffs to his tunic, ironed his pants, cleaned his boots and cap. At first I regarded it as distrust to the abilities of my person, assigned to the commander as a messenger. Then I realized that he could not do otherwise. The commander was accustomed to preserve both his dignity and that of the sailor. I'll do it myself, he told me. What am I, Barin? After all, we are of the same origin. We were both shepherds in our childhood, he in the Belarusian village of Shpilki, and I. Well, it's not about me. Gurin is a wonderful man, and we, sailors, heartily predicted a great future for him. May good luck accompany him in everything. True, some of the sailors took offence at Anton Iosifovich. Those were those who suffered from seasickness. And our commander had a rule: if the destroyer was on a campaign and the signal for dinner was given, Gurin would necessarily change the course so that the ship would rock more. Why do you do this? Asked him once an English officer translator. Hardening people. If a sailor eats in such a rocking, he will not fail in the most difficult situation. And indeed, it helped young sailors to get used to the sea. A bright head and a warm heart. Our officers said about the commander, to be like captain of the third-rank Gurin means to be a real sailor. Anton Iosifovich knew Gremieshi to the smallest details, studied its manoeuvring qualities perfectly, knew how the destroyer behaves on the wave, on the circulation, when shifting the rudder, when moving in reverse. We were witnesses to how skillful management of the destroyer often decided the outcome of the battle. Such was the case when from behind the clouds suddenly jumped out 4 enemy bombers. One of the planes immediately went into a dive. On Gremishi barely had time to open fire. Gurin warily watched the junkers. On the orders of the commander of the ship, steeply turned to the left. Nazi pilot also changed course. Gurin noticed this and quickly gave a new command. The ship went to the right when the pilot dropped bombs. Explosions raised fountains of water far from the destroyer. The second junkers also missed, because the commander of the ship violated his calculations, suddenly slowed down. The Nazi did not notice it, and the bombs fell ahead of the Gremeni. Precise calculation and skillful maneuvering for the first time saved the destroyer from enemy bombs. Of course, success in battle depends not only on the skill of the commander. It is necessary that the entire crew acted clearly, coherently, skillfully, instantly carried out the commander's orders. That is why Göring paid so much attention to the training and education of subordinates. The commander knows all of us well, knows how to support and encourage initiative. Watch Officer Senior Lieutenant Gavrilov on the passage by sea detected an enemy submarine. The commander was in the navigational deckhouse. Without a moment's hesitation, Gavrilov directed the destroyer to attack. He carried out the bombing competently, bravely and decisively. The plan of the fascist pirate was thwarted. The boat received heavy damage. Göring approved the actions of the senior lieutenant and in conversation with other officers once again emphasized that in all cases of watchkeeping on the bridge should be sharp, resourceful and, most importantly, do not get lost under any circumstances. There is a necessity attack the enemy on your own. Don't get hot and don't get lost. Hit the enemy before he can attack you, Anton Iosifovich said. The relationship between the commander and his assistant was interesting. Anton Iosifovich often asked Vasiliev how he would act in this or that situation, helped him to understand the difficult moments of the battle. Once before going to sea, the commander called Vasiliev to himself and briefly said, "You, Alexander Mikhailovich, will be in charge of the Gremishi." The senior lieutenant was pleased with the commander's confidence. Under Vasiliev's command, the ship left the anchor, went to the open sea. But now Anton Iosifovich appeared on the bridge. The assistant was embarrassed. "Consider that I am not here," Göring reassured him. "Continue to command." He never once interfered with the orders of the senior lieutenant. And so on throughout the entire trip. When we returned to the base, Göring shook his assistant's hand firmly. "Excellent, Alexander Mikhailovich. I have nothing to complain about." It is no coincidence that Vasiliev, having gone through an excellent school on the Gremiashchi, soon became commander of the destroyer himself. Göring taught officers to respect the sailor, to understand his soul, to develop in him the best traits of character. Since some time, our sailors more and more often began to think there will come a moment when the fleet commander will take away from us Göring. If the bosses asked for our sailors' opinion and consent. Nowhere and for what we would not let go of his commander. The premonition did not deceive us. At the end of 1942, in the rank of Captain Second Rank, Anton Göring was appointed commander of a division of destroyers of the Northern Fleet. This division included Gremishchi, Laud and Grozny. Fleet newspaper wrote about our commander as follows. Captain Second Rank A. Göring commanded the Gremishchi from the days of construction of the destroyer and until his transition to the highest position. This old North Sea sailor, who brought Gremishchi to the Guards' flag, is greatly loved. He handed over to the new commander a remarkable combat team. The day came, and the navigator came to the bay with a notebook. By his excited face we guessed what was the matter. "Sailors," he said. "Listen, evaluate, help," and began to read. At first quietly, confusedly, but soon his voice became stronger. "Let the sea meet us with a storm. The rumbling will not slacken its pace, and flocks of swift gulls will see the guardsmen off on their march. Our navigator will chart all our courses. On the bridge is our commander. For the happiness that's dearer than life. He's led us into battle more than once." The commissar silently took the torch and stuck it between two rows of tubes. There was a rustle that turned into a scraping sound. Ash and soot sprinkled on Zhukov's head. In a minute he was black as a Negro. Choking dust was in his mouth, in his eyes. Zhukov continued to work. Belov felt uncomfortable. His comrade was working, and he was sitting idly by. He tried on the torch, raised it, and also began to work. In 3 hours, Zhukov and Belov cleaned all the tubes. Wiping his hands with soot, Zhukov said, "Though you, Herman, are a guy and prickly as this brush, but I believe in you." "I believe," Belov mocked him. "And at the meeting you demanded that I should be given a stricture?" What else could I do with you?" Belov muttered something in reply, but in a more peaceful manner. He began to like this simple, hard-working and cheerful Commandant Ivan Zhukov. His diligence in the boiler, on the dusty business, finally conquered the arty electrician. Belov also remembered an incident during the firing on the shore. The enemy snapped back angrily. The shells were falling near the Gremenshi. Young sailor Budontsov, a quiet boy from Donbass, for the first time got into such a mess. He was the second gunner, and Zhukov was the first, whether out of inexperience or confusion, but he was too impetuous in rotating the horizontal gunnery wheel. This affected the accuracy of shooting. Zhukov noticed the sailor's confusion. Deciding to help his friend, he took the second wheel. So Zhukov worked the whole battle for two, and coped perfectly. On Budontsov, it had an effect stronger than any reproach. In the next battle, he acted more diligently and confidently. Ivan Zhukov's example was beneficial. "Do your job with heart," the commissar instructed. "Do not fuss. Think about the accuracy of aiming. And forget about the fact that we can be covered. And everything will be all right." Belov remembered all this here, in the main boiler, somehow instantly and vividly, as if he saw in a flash of lightning a long familiar, but already forgotten picture. "Sharing his experiences with me," German Belov said. "And he, Zhukov, a comrade what is necessary. Every heart needs a special key. If you make a mistake, the man will be closed, and not soon understand him." That's what happened to Pavel Petukov. Stepan Zozulia, the chief officer of the control group, was angry with him and decided to influence him with severity. The sailor was reprimanded and sentenced. For months the foreman did not dismiss him to the shore, though he knew that Pavel had a favorite girl in the city. There are unsuccessful petty officers, and disciplined and demanding and a loud voice, but the commander is unfit, because he does not put his soul into the service, and without that a commander cannot. Our Zozulia was strangely self-loving. He was angry with Petukov for the fact that this sharp-tongued sailor had repeatedly accused the petty officer of ignorance, and he did it not anywhere, but in the classroom. Zozulia really could not boast of deep knowledge. He almost never read books, and he didn't bother to study the material part either. He was a gloomy, withdrawn man, angry at everyone because he had to pay alimony to his wife and child abandoned in Vitegra. He had no friends. With sailors, Zozulia behaved like an appanage prince, I'll do as my left foot wants. But on Petukov he was so aggressive that he almost brought him to the court-martial. Accused of all mortal sins, the vizier was suspended from his watch. At that time we were accompanying a caravan, which was breaking through the ice after the icebreakers. A storm caught up with us beyond the Kara gate. We were tossed about mercilessly, wet and chilled. We stood on the bridge, clutching the planking with both hands. In the second cabin there was no one except Petukov. All his comrades were at battle stations. Pavel was thrashing about in the cramped room, unable to find peace. At that moment some underwater explosion shook the destroyer. From the neck of the compartment, where the gyrocompass was located, showed the worried face of the navigational electrician Alexander Vostrov. He reported to the bridge. "The gyrocompass is out of meridian." That's right, Petukov thought at the time. I, too, seem to have left the meridian. He went up on deck for a smoke. Night had fallen. In the darkness the sailors were talking anxiously. "The mine spared us, so this storm will kill us," was heard someone's tenor. The seams in the stern had split. Fuel oil is leaking from the fuel tank. By permission of the convoy commander, the damaged Gremishi broke away from the convoy. Petukov went down to the cockpit. He tied himself with a sailcloth strap to the board, rested his feet on the pile driver, and tried to take a nap. But sleep did not come. Meanwhile, at the main command post, our new ship commander, Captain Second Rank Evgeny Kashevarov, was talking to a young navigator, Lieutenant Kiselov. "The gyrocompass is malfunctioning. The sky is closed. Will you be able to determine the exact location of our ship by depths and radio bearing?" "I will try, Comrade Commander," answered the lieutenant. On a dark, stormy night, the destroyer was approaching the shore. One could not see a sign around. like in a corked barrel. There was a limited supply of fuel left in the ship's tanks. Observers, Kasharov shouted to us through the howling wind. Better watch the horizon. But no matter how much Fokiv, Gritsai, Pimenov and Onokov looked into the darkness, not a single glimpse was visible anywhere. And according to calculations, Gremishchi should have been in sight of the lighthouse on Cape Sviatoy Nose long ago. Comrade Commander, approached Kashavarov rangefinder Gritsai. Petukov is the sharpest observer we have. Permit me to call him to the bridge. I've suspended him from the watch at Petty Officer Zozuli's insistence. No, let him sit in the cockpit. Another half an hour passed in an anxious search for the lighthouse beam. Kashavarov switched the machine telegraphs to Meili. "So where are we, navigator?" asked the commander. "According to my calculations, we are approaching the Iokang Islands." "According to yours," replied Kashavarov. "But according to my calculations, we are tearing ashore at a speed of 10 miles per hour. Where are your islands?" Both looked ahead. Darkness. Only the muffled and rolling roar of the sea rolled from edge to edge. The captain of the second rank put one machine telegraph to stop and moved the other to smallest rattling, as if it had settled down, barely moving forward. "Comrade Commander," came the pleading voice of Gritsai. "Let me call Petukov." "And why are you trying so hard for Petukov?" was surprised by the commander. Everyone was accustomed to the rumble of the sea, and therefore immediately caught some extraneous sound. The officers gathered on the right wing of the bridge listened warily, but they could not make out anything. And then the commander of the ship could not stand it. "Gritsai," he ordered. "Petukov on the bridge." "What is this noise?" asked the commander, when the sailor was next to him. Pavel strained his hearing and backed away. The sound of the surf. "Comrade Commander," he exhaled. "The distance to the shore is 1.5 miles. "It cannot be," Kizelev protested. Lieutenant Kizelev had recently arrived on the Gremishchi. He behaved with the aplomb of a dashing sea wolf. The guardsman, who had seen the sights, laughed good-naturedly at the arrogance of the young officer. "It will pass as soon as he has had some half-undra," they said. In this case, the word half-indra meant the hardships of sea life. "What did I tell you, navigator?" threw the commander and set the handles of both telegraphs to stop. The rattling lay adrift. "Look for the Sviatonovsky lighthouse." Kashavarov firmly ordered Petukov, Gritsai and signalmen. Petukov, turning the handles of the visor, smoothly guided its lens along the invisible horizon line. Above the sea, heavy clouds could be seen as barely visible spots. There were clouds all around. Suddenly, Petukov fixed his eyes on the eyepiece. He noticed some light shadow. A few seconds later, this shadow flashed again against the background of black clouds. Petukov froze the viewfinder without taking his eyes off it. For the third time, the sky was faintly illuminated. Glimmers of light. Petukov reported. Yevgeny Terentievich ran up to him, forgetting his years and his sick heart. "Where?" "Look." The commander fixed his eyes on the eyepieces. "I don't see anything." "You imagined." Petukov again pointed the binoculars at the low clouds and even more clearly distinguished the dim reflection of light beaming up from the horizon. There could be no doubt the lighthouse was there. But the commander again saw nothing. "Signalers," he shouted. "Do you see anything?" "No." "Petukov, point those glimpses of yours again." Well, Gritsai, Fokiv, Onokov, Rulev, Pimenov, look in the viewfinder." None of the observers saw anything. For a minute all voices on the bridge were silent, and the murmur of the surf was heard even more clearly and menacingly. Kashavarov stepped to Petukov. "Do you see the glimpses?" "I do." "Course?" "Starboard 30 degrees. Now we'll go on this course. Do you understand what this means? I'm putting the fate of this ship in your hands. For 15 minutes. If we don't reach the lighthouse in that time, hold on." "I understand you, Comrade Commander." Rattlesnake turned 30 degrees to the left and slowly moved forward. The minutes dragged on agonizingly. "So where is the lighthouse?" the commander asked hoarsely. "I see it," replied Pavel. "We'd better make more headway, we'd sooner reach its visibility." Kashavarov hesitated for a moment, then moved the telegraph handles to medium. 15 minutes passed. "Where is the lighthouse?" Kasharov held on to the handles of the machine telegraphs, ready to immediately slow the ship down. "I'm asking." He did not finish. "Fire. Right on the bow," shouted simultaneously Gritsai and Fokiv. The next moment a bright flash of light pierced the darkness with a dagger. That was the Sviatono's lighthouse. The destroyer Gremishi was heading for Gremika. We anchored at the Iokang roadstead. The bilge machinists were repairing the hull. For lack of rivets, they bolted together the separated sheets of plating. It would be possible to reach the base and their repair. In the morning, Petukov was called by Lieutenant Commander Gavrilov, who became the assistant to the commander of the ship instead of Vasiliev, who had left. "Now I am sending a boat to the port for fresh bread. I'm appointing you as the boatswain of the boat." On the Gremiashi, it was the first time when a sailor, not a petty officer, was sent at the head of the rowing crew. Battler only managed to get bread in the afternoon. By this time a strong wind had risen, whipping up main waves on the roadstead. Driven by the friendly sweeps of the oars, the six dived in the waves. Salty splashes flew abundantly from overboard, whipping the faces of the sailors. The side of the Gremeni was approaching. Petukov, sitting at the helm, noticed a restless movement on the deck of the ship. At the rail he saw the tall figure of Gavrilov. Pavel guessed that the assistant commander was experiencing the same fears that tormented, and him at the side of the destroyer waves were moving. The slightest miscalculation and the boat will hit the hull of the ship and shattered. At a sharp angle, six approached the ship. When there were 30 meters left to the lowered ropes, Pavel heard Gavrilov's exclamation. What he shouted, the sailor could not hear in the noise of the wind. There was no time to ask again. Right Taiban, left to the water. Pavel commanded the rowers. For a few minutes more the dinghy fought with the wave. At last it was exactly under the hooks of the hoists. 100 guardsmen grasped the ropes. The block squealed, and the dinghy flew up on the roasters to its place. As the rowers climbed out and shook off the water, they looked around contentedly. Voices came from the deck to them. Dasho approached. And Pashka. "Look, what a good boy," he managed for the foreman. And how well he did it. Captain Lieutenant Gavrilov interrupted Petukov's report on the completion of the mission. "Don't report. I saw everything myself. And what were you yelling at me?" "I couldn't make it out." "How?" "You couldn't hear. And you acted exactly as I advised." Without noticing it, Gavrilov spoke to Petukov on you. We knew it meant that the assistant commander was pleasantly surprised and excited. "How else could it be, Comrade Captain Lieutenant?" Petukov said. "If I had acted differently, the dinghy would have skipped the ship and—" "There you are." Gavrilov looked at the sailor with merry eyes. "Well done." The sailor was believed. How much it means. Petukov became a completely different person. Self-confidence, dignity, pride returned. No one thought he was incorrigible anymore. And that word just sounded strange to him now. A good sailor. I wish there were more of them. We were happy for Pavel. Only Petty Officer Zulya was frowning and angry. Apparently he realized his mistake. Gremishi moored in Solombala, a suburb of Arkhangelsk. I was ordered to stand watch at the gangway. The sailors were resting. There was silence over the Divina, the military port and the city. Smells of wood, tarred hemp and the sea came from the shore. As the Pommers say, the healthiest spirit in the whole world. The boys ran out from behind the duckboard of the warehouse. I intended to chase them off the dock, but I looked at their grimy faces, their old clothes, and I remembered my unhappy fatherless childhood. There were 3 of them. The red-haired stout one was always adjusting his sailor's cap, which was falling down on his peeling nose. His buddies called him Kolka. The other one was black-haired, with narrow shoulders. They both wore striped sailor's tunic. The third was the smallest and skinniest. He wore an army cap with a wide red brim, a chintz shirt torn at the elbow, and grey pants with patches on the knees. The boys were 10 to 12 years old. They were Solombala boys, children of fishermen and sailors who had gone to the front. They thrust up their chins, looking around the high deckhouses and towers of the Gremeni. "Guys," I said, "don't come close to the board. We'd like Uncle Petya," trying to give his voice bass notes, Kolka said. I realized at once whom the boys wanted to see: a fellow countryman from Solombala, Pyotr Sukovakov, one of our cooks. I pressed the bell button, and when the messenger sailor appeared, asked to summon Sukovakov. Soon Peter came down to the dock and hugged each baby in turn. It turned out that before his service he had been either a pioneer leader or the first Timurovtsi. I heard fragments of their conversation. Kolka caught a pike like this. We were coming here and found a clip of cartridges, and he lost his bread cards. Pyotr went back to the ship. A few minutes later he ran down the gangway to the boys, handing them 3 loaves of black bread. He had been authorized to do so by the chief officer. The sailor hugged his little countryman once more and gave each of them a little push. "Go home. Mothers will soon come from work." The quiet Divinsky evening was coming. The distance was lost in the fog. The air smelled of tar and meadows. It seemed that at this hour peace and tranquility reigned throughout the land. Hardly had the boys passed the bow of the Rattle when 3 plump snow-white buns and packets of galettes fell into the water from the stern of the Liberty, which was standing at the same wharf. The boys looked up. On the Liberty's ute stood a sluggard with a pipe in his teeth, and in a guttural voice he sneered. "Baby. Hap. Slap." The smallest man nimbly placed the black loaf on the wharf beam and dashed into the water. He had already fished out a white loaf and 2 packets of galettes when he heard Kolkin's angry shout. "Get back, you parasite." Kolka was the first to notice something wrong. As soon as the boy jumped into the water, the American began clicking his camera, taking pictures of the kid floundering at the stern of the steamer. Another gentleman, in a grey suit, smiling gloatingly, pointed the lens of a movie camera at the child. The boy saw none of this. He raked up to the pier and held out his trophies to his comrades. Kolka snatched from him a snow-white soft bun and 2 orange packets of galettes and, without saying a word, threw them back into the water. "Get out," he grumbled angrily. "Nerd. There's no Russian pride in you." He pulled his buddy out of the water. The little one rose to his feet. Water was dripping off him. The chintz shirt stuck to his body. He couldn't get a tooth on a tooth from the cold. On the deck of the steamer, the Americans were laughing. Now the boy understood everything. He raised his head and squared his thin shoulders. "Oh, you do?" resented the little Solombalian. "We don't need your handouts." And before Kolka could realize what would happen next, the little fellow snatched a loaf of black bread from him and launched it on the deck of the Liberty, saying, "Eat our bread. It might give you a little conscience." The gentlemen were blown off the deck. Perhaps the loaf of bread seemed like a stone to them. At any rate, they got away in time, for Kolka had a long, rusty bolt in his hands. "Stand down, boys." I restrained the angry and belligerent boys. As if on cue, they turned toward me. Their faces were stern and serious. Wiping their noses and pulling up their pants, the little Solombals headed for the shore. I looked after them. These will grow up to be real men. The young men from the American ships behaved insolently, but we had to restrain ourselves. Allies, after all. And yet one day Nikifor Phil, the most cold-blooded and restrained of us, overstepped the rules of diplomatic etiquette. We were riding in a streetcar. Next to us, tucked into their textbooks, sat students of the Arkhangelsk Pedagogical Institute. At the Dynamo Garden, a lanky American sailor, in a white cap, entered the carriage. "Okay, Johnny." He introduced himself, sat down next to the blonde student, and pulled out a pack of cigarettes in a cellophane wrapper. "Earl, tell him we don't have smoking on the streetcar." This was uttered by an old lady with glasses who sat opposite. The student gently warned the American. "But smoke." "Ha, ha," the brute replied, flicking his lighter and smoking. Dropping the ash on his pants, he pulled out a brightly wrapped chocolate bar and a cellophane bag of light brown stockings from his back pocket. He added a pack of Chesterfield cigarettes. All this he handed to the girl, nodding his head unequivocally at the carriage door. "A like you," laughed John. "Lenka," jumped the students. "He's calling you for love." The girl blushed like a poppy. John grabbed her arm and dragged her to the door. Lena broke free and rushed to the other end of the carriage. She was nearly crying with resentment. John shrugged his shoulders and began offering his goods to the other girls, nodding his head at the door. He didn't manage to finish the sentence. A heavy hand rested on John's shoulder. He turned around. In front of him stood a petty officer of the Soviet Navy in a visor with an orange ribbon on a fringe. It was the Partorg of our unit, Nikifor Phil, the foreman of the third gun of the main caliber. He and I watched the Yankees' adventures with squeamishness and indignation. Nikifor, a man of purest soul, could not stand it. Tall, strong and stern, he easily pushed John to the exit. It happened as the streetcar jerked forward sharply. Grabbing the door handle, the American dropped his goods on the floor. I inadvertently stepped my foot on the cellophane wrapping of some rag. John bent over, indignantly shouting words whose meaning we never understood. Phil was the first to find himself. Holding out a crisp piece of paper to the American, he gritted his teeth. "Here's your loss." John snatched the $30 bill from the petty officer's hand and jumped off the streetcar, not waiting for the next stop at the House of Pioneers. Lena picked up the crumpled bags from the floor and threw them off to the American on the sidewalk. "And take this one in addition," she shouted cheerfully. "Shopkeeper." All the way to the ship, Phil and I were silent. Anger and bewilderment choked us. A small, trifling incident, but it greatly shook the remnants of our respect for the Allies. In 1944, more and more joyful news came from the fronts. One after another followed the enormous power of blows on the enemy. The radio brought from Moscow the sound of salutes in honor of the troops who liberated the cities. In its rapid movement, our victorious army had already crossed the Soviet border, bringing deliverance from the fascist yoke to the peoples of Europe. We were looking forward to the hour when, in a series of unprecedented in scope combat operations, will be intertwined and our strike in the Arctic Circle. On the night of October 10th, 1944, the destroyers Gremishi and Gromky quietly left the Kola Bay. Weather has ordered a complete calm. Only on the Kilda Strait we were rocked by the ocean ripples rolling from the northwest. Fulfilling the order of the commander of the Northern Fleet, our ships soon entered the Aina Bay, which goes into the granite body of the Rybaki Peninsula. From there we were to open artillery fire on the batteries, the river crossing near the village of Titovka and on the enemy stronghold Obergov. The fascists smelled something bad. They continuously illuminated the coast with rockets. At last the day of reckoning has come. We, North Sea sailors, have been preparing for it for a long time. Now the enemy will experience all our fury on his own skin. It is not enough for us to throw the Nazis out of the Soviet polar region. We must liberate the native Russian land of Pekenga and help the people of Norway. This is our sacred duty. Lieutenant Kizelev, the navigator, often throwing back with a short nod of his head, his long blonde hair falling on his bulging forehead, leaned over the map. The young officer had already gotten up to speed, and the ship's commander had no complaints about him. Next to the navigator, calculating something in his mind, stands our new artilleryman, Lieutenant Captain Shabarov, medium height, energetic, stout. All sailors are in their places at the command and range post. I and senior sailor Mikhail Melikov had the great honor to work on the central gun site. All guns of the main caliber will repeat the movements of our sight. The accuracy of our work now depends on the accuracy of fire. The instrument arrows have come to life. I'm smoothly guiding the sight along the horizon. There it is, the enemy shore. The first salvo shook the rattlesnake. The shells whistled westward. 4 red lights flash on the control device. It means that all the guns are loaded and aimed exactly at the target, as well as my sight. The rumble again. Now it does not stop for more than a minute. During this time, several dozens of shells were sent into the enemy's camp. Suddenly I hear someone's anxious cry from the bridge. I look through the eyepiece. The shore and the bay are brightly illuminated. And soon in the field of view of the device got chandelier, suspended by a fascist pilot. Now wait for enemy bombers. But our fire does not weaken. Shells are flying at the enemy front line, at the stronghold Obogov. The enemy is resisting. His batteries on the capo fire on us. The shells are bursting close. The bridge receives a report the commander of the 3rd gun is mortally wounded. My heart sinks. Nikifor, our party leader, a wonderful friend. My eyes mist up. I wipe them with the palm of my hand and look again in the viewfinder, keeping in the crosshairs of threads the given point on the shore. The battle continues. Nikifor died as a communist, and at the most terrible moment he thought only of the cause. Shoot without delay were his last words. Avenging his death, the artillerymen increased their fire. Zamokny, Filia's pupil, Senior Sailor Tabalakin, replaced the gun commander. Senior Sailor Barzanov took Tabalakin's place, and Senior Sailor Niechik from the machinists worked on the instruments for 2. The 3rd gun did not reduce the rate of fire for a second. As a result of the artillery raid, the crews of Gremichny and Grumki destroyed 2 batteries, ammunition depot, destroyed dozens of pillboxes and bunkers, killed hundreds of enemy soldiers. Thus we rendered great help to our landing party, which landed on the shore. The ship moved to leave the bay. When we passed not far from the mouth of the river, one of the surviving Hitler's batteries, installed on a high bank, opened fire on Gremeny. Melikov and I could not see this battery in the viewfinder, but we guessed its location by the flashes of shots. We wanted to deal with it immediately, but the fire manager, Captain Lieutenant Shabarov, calmly ordered to concentrate all attention on the river crossing, where at that time a lot of enemy's manpower and equipment had accumulated. Our illuminating shell, fired by the commanders of the 2nd gun, exploded with beautiful fireworks behind the crossing. In the center sight, Melikov and I clearly see the bridge across the river, and on it Hitlerites running in different directions. We put the crosshairs on the middle of the bridge, and our shells fell there. The target was covered at once. Shabarov's command followed. Kill! The barrage of fire swept over the crossing, and the village where the retreating huntsmen were fleeing, and the dam where many cars were piled up. Debris flew into the air, everything was burning. Only after that our commander decided to deal with the enemy battery, which continued to shell us. I and Melikov were aiming at its flashes. Friendly beat guns. After several salvas, enemy battery is silenced. Early in the morning, destroyers Gremishi and Loud arrived in the Kola Bay, so that in 12 hours again go to the Ina Bay. From there we supported the successful offensive of the Marines of the Northern Defence Area. The commander of the Northern Fleet set before the squadron commander, Rear Admiral Fokin, the task on the night of October 26th in the area of Vard Tanafjord to search for enemy ships, and at dawn to bombard the port of Vard, destroy its facilities, destroy the enemy ships accumulated there. The fulfillment of this order is entrusted to the leader Baku, destroyers Razumny, Gremishchi and Razviani. Ammunition consumption 40 shells per gun. In the evening, the commander of the ship, grey-haired with thoughtful dark eyes, Captain 2nd Rank Kashavarov III in command of the Gremishchi, came into our cabin. He played a few games of dominoes, had dinner with us. He told us about affairs on our front. We learned that the troops of the Kalian front stormed Pekinga. The defeated fascist units fled by sea to Kirkenes, to northern Norway. And there, in the bases and ports nearest to us, a lot of enemy troops have accumulated. We'll have to work this night, said the commander. And an hour and a half later, as he left the cockpit, we were already dropping anchor. It was a dark, stormy night. We found ourselves in the keel of the Razumi. Looking closely, ahead I recognized the leader Baku. The dark strip of the Rybaki Peninsula disappeared in the distance. Next to me on the running bridge is signalman Lushkov. He is humming a favorite song. Farewell, Rocky Mountains. The fatherland is calling us to a heroic deed. We went out to the open sea on a harsh and long journey. Our ships are sailing in total darkness, no beacons blinking around us, but we're going the familiar way to the northwest, to the shores of Nazi-occupied Norway. All sailors are looking around. At 0:15 a.m., our ships turned westward. We start searching for the enemy convoy. We are on the traverse of Vardi. We are approaching the shore, then we go more seaward. Minefields all around. But our sailors have long ago studied all the fairways. Here is a large fjord, in which Soviet submariners have arranged a real graveyard of fascist ships. We're out of luck. The enemy stubbornly does not want to show himself, and the time is approaching dawn. At the latitude of Cape Barlavog, ships are turning back. Navigators of the ships with the help of radars are watching the coast. We are approaching Varda from the north. The enemy is not waiting for us. About it speak bright lights in the port. Hitlerites hastily loaded on ships are going to take their caravan to the sea at dawn and slip away to the west. Too late. The first to open fire were the leader's commandos. Then the guns of the destroyers began to talk. We're firing with the help of radio-technical means. 3 minutes later on the shore, dazzling whirlwind rushed explosion of great force. Crimson flame in a funereal fringe of smoke spread across the horizon. In the camp of the enemy rose unimaginable panic. Eyewitnesses from the Norwegians then told the first shells from the destroyers demolished the mooring facilities and standing at the pier transport. Hundreds of Nazi huntsmen, heroes of Crete and Narvik, found themselves in the water. The blow of Soviet destroyers from the sea was so bold and unexpected that the Nazis took it for an air raid. They opened a strong anti-aircraft fire. Only later, when our ships lay on the left tack, the Nazis realized that the bombardment is not from the air, and from the sea. In the battle entered the German coastal batteries. The destroyers maneuvered among the surges. Shrapnel punctured the smokestack on the flagship, riddled in several places the hull of the burden. The destroyer Rezrez Dunai received light damage, but the ships continued the fight. At 6 hours and 56 minutes in the port of Vard there were 4 large fires. They were accompanied by explosions. Shells fall on the side of our ship. The destroyer shakes so hard that one of the gunners of the turret of the command Dolnoma post flies off the seat. The center sight is jammed. It turns around with difficulty. I'm doing everything I can to bring the device back to normal. But it's impossible. What a shame. I report the incident to the commander of the combat unit, Lieutenant Captain Shaburov. Night scheme. He briefly throws. I, Selivanov, and 2 young rangefinders jumped from the turret of the command and measurement post to the bridge, where night sighting devices were installed. It took no more than 5 seconds. We did not miss a single volley. Now the enemy shore can be seen even better. It's all on fire. Suddenly the signalman senior sailor Luzhkov shouted, 5 enemy destroyers in the north. I passed the sighting to the corrector and myself run to the left instrument. In fact, 5 Nazi ships are clearly distinguished on the lightened pre-dawn sky background. Our destroyers are as if in the corridor between the coastal batteries and destroyers of the enemy. But the Nazi sailors, seeing how we diligently handle the shore, do not dare to try the same. Soon the enemy ships hide behind the horizon. At 7 hours 18 minutes we finished the artillery strike and took a course to the base. The enemy shore was blazing. Giant flames licked low-hanging dark clouds. We were returning with victory. The Soviet troops had cleansed the north from the fascist scum. But Hitler's ships still tried to attack our convoys. The deaf polar night hung over the Barents Sea when the leader Baku, destroyers Gremishi, Razumi, Zhivuchi, daring and valorous one, after another passed the line of gates, leaving the hospitable harbour of Gremika. Their course lay to the Kola Bay. This time the ships were not bound by transports. The crews were ordered by the fleet commander to search for and destroy enemy submarines. The sea dimly glowed faintly in the sky polar aurora when the destroyers divided into 3 pairs and turned along the rocky shore. Sviatonovsky Lighthouse, which had once saved the Gremishchi and saved Pavel Petukov, flashed for the last time behind the stern. I was standing at the sightseer on the left side of the bridge. From the open door of the acoustic deckhouse came a ringing squeak. Looking around, I saw the slightly illuminated face of Petty Officer Second Article Reimar. On his head were massive headphones. Reimar was probing the coastal water column with his sonar. The sonar on our ship appeared a year ago. For lack of any other place, the deckhouse for it was built right on the bridge. In shape and size it resembled an ordinary closet. Reimar, a short, broad-shouldered man from Kiev, spoke and moved in no hurry. He never argued with anyone and had a mind of his own. I liked him for his wise worldly reasoning. But in the sea, already not young petty officer transformed, became agile, dexterous, cheerful. Searching for the underwater enemy, he went all into hearing. This time the sensitive instruments did not pick up anything. Stubbornly shifted black eyebrows, petty officer, without blinking, looked at the dimly lit scale with a figurative arrow and rotated a small handwheel. The arrow moved in a circle. From the deckhouse came a quiet P-I-N-H, Pi-I-I-I-N-H, Pi-I-I-H. This sound is melodic, not without musicality. And yet it's annoying. For the umpteenth time I put my eyes to the viewfinder's eyepieces. The clouds have covered the sky, covering the polar lights. Only where the sky converges with the sea, I notice a barely perceptible horizon line. Reimar cries out. I hear explosions. Cursor. The commander rushed to the door of the acoustic deckhouse. I stuck to the viewer. It was about 23 o'clock. On the port side traverse was Porchnik's lip when Petukov shouted. Flash of a searchlight. Beyond the horizon. We also saw a light streak and heard underwater explosions. Kashavarov by this time received the command of the commander to support the destroyer Zhivuchi, which discovered and attacked a fascist submarine. Captain of the 3rd rank Ryabchenko was lucky, Gavrilov said with good envy. Sizzling, the waves gave way to the Gremeni. Humming with fans, our ship was rushing through the night sea to the aid of another ship engaged in a dangerous and difficult fight. Radiometricians of the destroyer Zhivuchi detected an enemy submarine in a surface position. She had apparently surfaced to recharge her batteries. Its silhouette merging with the darkness of the night was seen by the commander of Zhivuchi, Captain 3rd rank Ryabchenko. He decided to use the surest way, a ram. At full speed, the destroyer rushed to the boat. Before the enemy ship was a few dozen meters, on its bridge frightened people fussed. Torpedoes, shouted the signalman. They swept over the starboard side of the Zhivuchi and raced away. The steel bow of the destroyer slammed into the side of the boat. The impact was so strong that many of the sailors on the bridge fell. Reverse. Ryabchenko made the decision to pull his ship back in order to repeat the ram. As the ship was pulling back, the gunners opened fire from all guns on the boat, which was illuminated by a searchlight. A shell from the 4-inch gun of Petty Officer 1st Article Budev exploded in the deckhouse of the Nazi ship. Automatic guns strobed the boat with their bursts. It was not necessary to ram the submarine a second time. It disappeared into the abyss. From the stern of the destroyer followed sprinkled bombs. When our destroyer approached the scene of the battle, on the waves already blurred a wide stain of salt, fragments of boards, scraps of paper. After listening to the sea, Reimar briefly determined. The end. We were ordered to guard the damaged Zhivuchi. As a result of the ramming blow, the destroyer was dented in the underwater part. In the bow compartment there was a leak. The search for submarines did not stop. Still from the deckhouse of Petty Officer 2nd Article Reimar carried on the bridge sounds of impulses. Pi-I-I-I-N-H, Pi-I-N-H, P-E-E-E-E-E, E-E-E-E-E. We arrived safely in the Kola Bay. On the passage from the area of the Nazi submarines, sinking sailors Petukov and Onukov discovered a floating mine. It was left aside. Our combat watch continued. And here it came, the bright victory day. Hear us, Soviet people. Hear us, great motherland. These words from the Guard's oath began our report to the country on May 9th, 1945. At the solemn rally, we summarized the results of our combat work. During the Great Patriotic War, the crew of the squadron destroyer Gremieshi 11 times supported the flank of the Red Army and the Northern Fleet landings with artillery fire. Only after shelling enemy positions on the night of February 23, 1942, on the shore, our scouts counted more than 400 corpses of Hitler's soldiers and officers. We participated in 4 mine-laying operations, in convoying 39 Allied and 24 domestic caravans of ships. 3 times Gremieshi, together with other ships, acted on enemy sea communications, twice made artillery strikes on the fortress of Vardy, carried combat patrols. The crew of the destroyer Gremieshi repelled 112 attacks of enemy aviation, having shot down 14 and damaged 23 airplanes. 1 submarine was sunk and several submarines were damaged. During the Great Patriotic War, the destroyer Gremieshi travelled 6,000 miles in battles and storms. In the fire of battles, the sailors grew and grew in courage. Many of the guardsmen joined the party. The party organisation of the ship by the end of the war numbered 150 people. Every sailor, petty officer, and officer earned several government awards. And the first commander of the Gremieshi II, Gurin, became a hero of the Soviet Union. Gremieshi. A wonderful school was passed by our sailors on this ship. Where are my friends now? A turbulent life full of creative daring has scattered them all over the country. Some of them are still serving in the Navy, passing their experience and knowledge to young sailors. Others work in factories, collective farms and state farms. But the memory of the Guard's ship lives in their hearts, just as the traditions and heroic deeds of veterans live in the Navy.